over a decade and a half, Sunday Mornings at the Marxist Library has hosted programs for a diverse platform of presentations on topics on issues such as political economy, capitalism, socialism, communism, imperialism, politics, materialism, and war. During the pandemic, and maybe afterwards, we have and will meet digitally on Zoom, although we will solicit donations to support the work of the Marxist Library. We have consciously, and I hope successfully, cultivated a culture of mutual respect and the understanding that we do not necessarily agree on all matters. Rather, this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. The opinions expressed are those of the participants. They do not represent the ICSS or the Marxist Library necessarily. However, we're united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx. We believe that his work remains relevant today. Our motto, taken from Karl Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, is, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Today's speaker will be Rick Sterling, who will be speaking about the Western campaign against Russian and Chinese athletes. Rick is active in the Task Force on the Americas and the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center. He researches and writes articles on diverse subjects, from the campaign to save City College in San Francisco to Syria and international sports. Just a quick note on how the session will be conducted today. After the presentation, we'll have a short break for announcements, followed by an hour of question and answer moderated by myself. If you have any questions or comment during the Q&A, raise your hand in the participants window and you will be called in that order. You'll have 2 minutes for your question or comment, and please be respectful to the speaker and the moderator. 12:30 we'll open up for open discussion. The chat window will also be open if you want to signal anything to the group or to the moderator. So with that, why don't you take over, Rick? Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, and thank you to Roger Harris for inviting me to come today and to the whole committee that organizes these presentations. I was wanting to write a follow-up article about the Sun Yang case, and this has prompted me to do that. So the article's not written yet, but it's going to be in the coming days. And there's also been big developments regarding Russia's exclusion from the Olympic Games. And so I'm going to cover really two different cases. The one is the campaign against Russian athletes, and in the second part, the campaign against the Chinese swimmer Sun Yang. These cases are different in one sense, but they're united in that I believe there is a concerted campaign through the World Anti-Doping Agency to demonize and denigrate Russia and China in the sporting arena. Probably most of us will remember back to the 1980s, when in 1980, the United States boycotted the Moscow Olympics, supposedly because of Russian interference in Afghanistan. 4 years later, Russia boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics, pretty much, I think, in retaliation, because in those days, the Soviet Union believed in giving tit for tat. But those examples show how politics has been part of international athletics in the past, and it will probably continue to be so.
Rick, do you have those slides?
What's that?
Do you have slides?
I do have some slides.
Oh, okay.
So it's much to the detriment of the individual athletes who work sometimes for years and years, intensely preparing themselves for international competition to do the best they can. They have to monitor their physical abilities, their diet, training intensely. And so it's really unfortunate in the cases where they are excluded, such as in 1980 and 1984 and in 2016, where the majority of Russian athletes were banned suddenly from the Rio Olympics. So I've got a few slides that are going to show the timeline of events. The first one we'll look at is regarding the Russian example. So I'll go to screen share now, I hope. So can you all see that?
It's working. Yeah, it's on.
So now, okay, so this is a timeline of significant events regarding the campaign against Russian athletes. While the events in Kiev, Ukraine, were dramatic events were happening there with protests, and then leading to snipers killing people on both sides of the conflict. The 900 miles away in Sochi, Russia, they were just wrapping up the Winter Olympics. And I believe it may be the case that the snipers were expedited there, were sent there in a rush because they wanted to expedite the coup before the Olympic Games finished in Russia, and Russia was not distracted by that important international events. In any case, simultaneous with the coup in Kiev, the Olympic Games was wrapping up in Sochi. And of course, people who are attending today will know how important the events in Ukraine were to the decline in relations between Russia and the West, subsequent to the coup in February of 2014. Just weeks later, Crimea voted to reunify with Russia. It had been placed within the Soviet Union, within the administration of the Ukraine. And so when Ukraine seceded from the Soviet Union, Crimea kind of went along with that, although most of the people in Crimea did not like it. But the coup, which took place in Kiev at the end of February 2014, and the subsequent attacks on buses of Crimeans who were coming back to Crimea, prompted a very strong move to have a referendum in Crimea, and they subsequently voted something like 85 or 88% in favor of reunifying with Russia. That, of course, even to this day, is viewed very negatively by NATO, which makes all sorts of accusations on the basis of it, as well as the conflict continuing in eastern Ukraine. But in any case, I think that was an important milestone in the decline in relations, in the increase in hostility between NATO and the West. And it's my contention that the West is attacking Russia in various fields, including the sporting field. At the end of 2014, there was a documentary, How Russia Makes Its Winners. And it was a big splash in Germany and throughout Europe, and it was played a lot in the West as well. And subsequently, the two people featured in that documentary were interviewed on 60 Minutes. They had a special feature on it. The athlete who was there Yulia Stepanov, was a runner, but she was a declining runner. Her husband was actually a doping control agent for Russia, but the two of them claimed that doping was widespread in Russia, and it was kind of ironic because Vitaly in the documentary says that there's nothing more important to him than stopping doping. And it subsequently turned out that he was actually providing drugs to his wife. So that, of course, was not mentioned in the 60 Minutes documentary. In any case, subsequent to that documentary, the World Anti-Doping Agency, known as WADA, established an independent commission to investigate whether doping was widespread in Russia. And then at the end of 2015, they issued a 300+ page report, which claimed that doping was widespread in Russia, and that the ringleader was the head of the Moscow laboratory, which was the WADA certified laboratory, which analyzes urine and blood samples to determine if doping is present. They accused Grigory Rodchenkov of being the mastermind, and they provided evidence that he was getting paid on the side by athletes to falsify their blood sample or blood or urine samples. Rodchenkov was more or less immediately fired by the Russians, and he was subsequently charged with criminal offenses. He fled more or less immediately to the United States, and he has been here in a witness protection plan ever since. The Stepanovs, who were featured in the documentary How Russia Makes Its Winners, they have also come to the United States, and they are also in a witness protection plan. In other words, you can't find out where they live, and they have been quite silent. Grigory Rodchenkov, on the other hand, has been quite vocal. So in May 2016, so this happened at the end of 2015. In the springtime of May, or in the springtime of 2016, 60 Minutes broadcasts the story about the Stepanovs. It's a direct interview with them and with reference to the documentary. And the New York Times features several stories based on interviews with Grigory Rodchenkov. Now, all these people have suddenly turned up in the United States. Suddenly, Rodchenkov is transformed from being the mastermind of doping into being a whistleblower and a squeaky clean. And I mean, he acknowledges his part in it, but he says that this was all controlled by higher ups. He was simply following orders, which of course is quite convenient for him. But in any case, that's what he says. Now, and this is going on in May of 2016 with the Rio de Janeiro Olympics forthcoming in just a few months. WADA very quickly appointed somebody named Richard McLaren, who was part of the first independent commission report, to investigate the allegations that are in that New York Times story. The New York Times story is pretty amazing in that it claims that during the Sochi Olympics, they were taking urine samples, and at night they were shuffling the urine samples of Russian athletes who were in a protection program. They had drilled what they called a mouse hole from the security zone where the samples are kept out to an adjacent room. And in that adjacent room, the supposedly tamper-proof urine bottles were being removed of the dirty urine samples and replaced with clean urine samples and then sent back through the Mouse hole. So it's all a pretty fantastic story, but of course it's been accepted pretty much without question by the Western media. In any case, that was the story. Then Richard McLaren, in a matter of weeks, he does an investigation into the claims, and he concludes that they are correct, and that in Russia there was a quote unquote state-sponsored doping scheme, and they make immediate demands that Russia be banned from the upcoming Rio de Janeiro Olympics. The International Olympic Committee is hearing this, and they say they're not going to decide on this issue. Of course, to ban a country from the Olympics is a major issue. I mean, this is huge. So they took the position they would not decide on this, but it was up to each athletic federation. There's more than 20 athletic federations that are part of the international athletic community that competes in the games, from track and field to weightlifting to handball and all the sports. They have their own sports federation. For the swimming federation is called FINA, for the French name for the International Swimming Federation. But many, not all, but many of the athletic federations proceeded to ban the Russian athletes, much to the anguish of Russian athletes who were intensely preparing and just weeks away from going to the Rio Olympics. This applied also to the disabled athletes who compete in the Paralympics, which immediately follows the International Olympics. So the Russian Paralympic athletes were also excluded. So an interesting element of this first McLaren report is that he never listened to, he interviewed Rodchenkov, and suddenly, from Rodchenkov being the ringleader, suddenly Rodchenkov was very believable, and McLaren did not solicit any comments from the Russians. And when the Russians tried to present their side to the story to dispute the claims, McLaren rejected that. And he admitted that he had not considered the Russian point of view. That obviously is a major a major failing of any report, when you don't consider both sides to the story and you don't even listen to them. So there was now, some people were very critical of the McLaren report. I wrote an article about that, and there were other criticisms. At the end of the year, McLaren issued a second report where he said he couldn't find a compatible time to meet with the Russian, but he did consider some of the Russian. He claimed that he did consider some of the Russian arguments, but discounted them. And in terms of meeting with the Russian authorities, who would have been the best people to respond, he said that he couldn't find a time that worked for both parties. In any case, his report was very sensational. In the report, he claimed that over 1,000 Russian athletes can be identified as being involved in or benefiting from manipulations to conceal positive doping tests. And he provided what he called an evidence disclosure package, which supposedly provided the proof of hundreds of Russian athletes who were doping. This report, like the first report, was accepted in the Western media pretty much without question, and there were and subsequently there were calls for more punishments of the Russians. Now, at that time, the big issue was that you can't exclude. I mean, the Olympic charters has a specific point about discrimination, and discrimination can be by country. In other words, you're not allowed to discriminate against an athlete just because of what country they come from, just the same as you can't discriminate by race or gender or any of these other factors, or religion or whatever. You can't discriminate by nationality. So so the demand was that, well, if McLaren has all this evidence of widespread doping in Russia, why don't you prove it? And why not discipline the culprits instead of everybody? So the disciplinary committee of the International Olympic Committee determined that 44, not 1,000, Russian athletes were guilty of anti-doping rule violations. You will see that term, anti-doping rule violations, ADRV, which is it's one of the acronyms that's commonly used in the athletics and anti-doping community. Now, I think subsequently, those 44 Russian athletes who were banned, basically, the disciplinary committee of the International Olympic Committee said that 44 were guilty and should be banned from future competitions. 39 of those Russian athletes challenged the banning. They said it's not true, and they appealed the Court of Arbitration in Sports, or CAS. CAS is the acknowledged arbiter of international sports. It's based in Switzerland. And because of that, the only court that is higher than that is the Swiss Supreme Court, which is also known as the Swiss Federal Tribunal. But in any case, appeals or efforts in the legal field, or the field of whether or not a person can participate in sports, they go to the Court of Arbitrations for Sports. CAS completely exonerated 28 of the Russian athletes, 28 of the 39, and then they partially exonerated the remaining 11. Western media, which had prominently broadcast McLaren's claims of over 1,000 Russians complicit in doping, was silent. Now, meanwhile, there in February of 2018, this is an interesting thing. The Winter Olympics were held in Pyeongchang, Korea. The Russian team could not compete as Russians, but a minority of Russian athletes were able to qualify as individuals or independents, and they went under the name, since you could not say Russia, and you could not fly the Russian flag, they had or on their jerseys, Olympic athlete from Russia. But the majority of Russian athletes could not compete there. Some of the ones who did compete were successful. There was one, for example, there was a husband and wife curling team that won a medal. But it was interesting that the man of the pair subsequently tested positive for a prohibited drug, meldonium. That was very strange, and the head of the curling federation kind of laughed. What is sports doping in curling? You must be joking, because the most energetic part of the curling, of course, is the sweeping, which takes place for about 20 seconds. So the idea that people would be using performance enhancing drugs to enhance their curling is a bit preposterous. So I believe it's possible that these athletes were some food that they had eaten was spiked. I think that's quite possible, and we've seen the CIA, for example, do much more, much worse than that. So it was big news there that the Russian athletes doping, and that continued the story. In contrast with the exoneration of 28, the majority of Russian athletes who had been specifically charged with an anti-doping rule violation, they were exonerated, but most of the Western public was unaware of this. In any case, moving on, in 2018, WADA lifted its ban on RUSADA, that's the Russian anti-doping agency, under the condition that they would turn over all Moscow lab data and samples. And here again, we have Grigory Rodchenkov in the act. And from early on, Rodchenkov, when he fled Russia, coming to the United States, he and his assistant took a lot of data from the laboratory, and so they have this they call it LIMS data, Laboratory Information Management System. This is a huge amount of data, 23 terabytes, and curiously enough, the World Anti-Doping Agency was, you could think if there's something wrong there, why do they need the data from Moscow? They can just look at the data that Grigory Rodchenkov has. But in September of 2018, they lifted the ban on RUSADA, saying that, okay, you can join us. You were excluded from the Korea Winter Olympics. Let's bring you back into the fold, but you need to provide us with the Moscow lab data. And that, I think, was very suspicious. I think it was intentional, and that has been used to further exclude Russia, ironically. So in January of 2019, RUSADA copied all the lab data. Some people from the World Anti-Doping Agency went to Moscow, and along with RUSADA, they copied all the data and they went back with it. Well, their investigation team determined that the data had been corrupted, files had been removed, files had been erased, and various allegations that the data was not authentic. Well, on the Russian side, they say that the lab data, which is the data which is being gathered in all of the computers in this large laboratory, this is an active process. It's not like you're not copying something from the past. This is the process is an active, ongoing process, and that discrepancies or files removed or files deleted was something that's done on a regular basis, and they claimed that there was no ill intent for this. But the World Anti-Doping Agency said, aha, this proves that the Russian government is still not being honest. And they have pursued this. And that until in the most recent, so just a couple of months ago, the Court of Arbitration in Sport ruled in favor of WADA, and WADA had said that they wanted to ban Russia for a further 4 years, and WADA reduced that from 4 to 2, but they basically went along with the World Anti-Doping Agency. Not only is Russia banned from participating in international sports, they're banned from hosting international sports, and they have to pay many millions of dollars for the WADA investigation and legal fees. So the charges and the decision are a big, this is a big setback to Russia. It's demoralizing to the athletes. Some of them can jump through extra hoops and compete as neutrals in the upcoming Olympics or in the subsequent Winter Olympics. But they cannot compete as Russians. Of course, this handicaps the national organization and the coordination and of coaching and funding athletics, which is a big thing in Russia. They've always put, they've always been a major sporting country, but whether it's track and field athletes or hockey players or pole jumpers, whatever, the weightlifters, all of the athletes are under this, have been demoralized and cannot compete as Russians in the next 2 Olympics. So it's a demoralizing situation. And I think the last thing I've got here is this discrepancy between these charges, the McLaren report allegations, because that's all they ever were, and the big deal that was made about this lab data, discrepancies in the lab data. If we look at recent actual statistics about doping, we find that Russia, for example, there were more more cases of anti-doping rule violations in the United States than there were in Russia. There were the most in Italy, 171, more in France, 128. So, there's kind of it's a major distraction to be talking about this, and the widespread acceptance of the McLaren reports and the acceptance of this decision from the Court of Arbitration in Sports on this case, I think flies in the face of common sense, and really they're punishing thousands of Russian athletes needlessly, and all this is being done under the banner of "quote unquote" fair sport. So it's very unfortunate. I've written, I guess, 4 or 5 articles about this, different aspects of it. So if you're curious to know more, with a lot of links and references, just Google my name and Russian athletes or Olympics or something like that, and the articles will come up. A lot of those articles were published at Consortium News. So I think I will, it's now 10 after 11. I think I'll go right on to Sun Yang if you think that's best, Alan, and I'll take the second example of bias and in sports.
Sounds good.
Okay, so now we come to Sun Yang. This is a picture of him. By the way, can you all see this okay? Is the screen sharing working okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So Sun Yang is one of the most successful swimmers of all time. He's got he's won numerous gold medals at the Olympics. He's won the top swimming competitions, all the way from 200 meter, 400 meter, 800 meter, 1500 meter, and he holds the all-time world record in the 1500 meter. As an athlete, I'm not. Athletes can really be important for a nation's identity and prestige, and people, in many countries feel very good about their successful international athletes, and that's very true in China as it is in all countries. So I got, because I had studied the issue of anti-doping and the discrimination against Russia, I was curious when I heard about Sun Yang coming under accusations of using drugs. So I started looking into that case and subsequently wrote 2 articles. And so here's the timeline. In 2008, Sun Yang, I think, is 28 right now. He's been swimming as a young teenager since he was a young teenager. He's quite tall. He's, I think, 6'4" or 6'6". In any case, his athletic ability was seen very early on, and he began training. In 2008, because when he was heavily training, he reported that he was having dizziness spells and heart palpitations, and the doctor prescribed a medication called trimetazidine to treat that, and that is similar to another medication called meldonium, and then in January of 2014, WADA added trimetazidine to the prohibited list of drugs. You could take it, but not in competition. So, and it's interesting that meldonium was widely used in Russia and East Europe for similar reasons. It allowed people who are training heavily, if they had incidents of dizziness afterward, it was found that that medication was helpful. It would not enhance your performance at all, but it was more of a genuine health safety medication. Meldonium was placed on the prohibited list from having not been on the list, and they caught a lot of Russian athletes, including Maria Sharapova, the tennis player. They caught them unawares because they were not paying sharp enough attention to the additions to the prohibited medication list. And I think Maria Sharapova was banned for a subsequent 2 years. But in any case, Sun Yang was not aware that this, and his doctor was also not aware that it had been added to the list, and the drug was detected when he was competing in a test, and they accused him of an anti-doping rule violation. At the hearing, it was acknowledged that he did not know the drug was newly prohibited, and he was given a rather light punishment. But the big thing is it counted as a full anti-doping rule violation. And the significance of that is that if you have one anti-doping rule violation, a full penalty is 4 years. And if you have a second one, your banning is for 8 full years. So while the 3-month banning was not major, the fact that it counted as a full anti-doping rule violation was big. That also allowed some competing athletes, such as Mac Horton, to start accusing Sun Yang of being a drug cheat. And Mac Horton did this publicly. And it was the start of a lot of controversy and accusations. In September of 2018, Sun Yang was coming back from the Asia Games that was held in Jakarta, Indonesia. He had been very successful at the games. I think he won 4 gold medals. And at the end of the games, he traveled from Jakarta, left there early in the morning, and flew on a couple of flights, and then made the long road trip. After flying all day, he had a 4-hour road trip to his city of Wuhan, arriving at 10 o'clock at night. And at that time, that's the night of the big incident that took place. What happened was that the drug testers determined that they wanted to do an out of competition test, and they wanted him to test him then. In the sporting world, in competition tests are very common, and Sun Yang is the most tested athlete in the world. He's tested for the last 8 years. He's been tested on average once every 2 weeks. So he has had many hundreds of drug tests. So the question is, well, what went wrong with this one? First of all, it is completely illogical. If he was wanting to take a prohibited drug, usually you take them before a competition or in a competition, not after competition, as he was about to start on a 1-month vacation. Sun Yang's Australian swim coach, Dennis Cotterill, by tradition, after every major competition, he has his athletes take 1 month off and just relax and take it easy before starting to prepare for new competition. So it makes no sense that Sun Yang would, if he was taking prohibited drugs, which I think he was not, it makes no sense that would be when he would do it. In any case, it's kind of a long story. If you want to read more details of it, you can see my article. But the short of it is that the drug team of 3 people, and now it should be noted that the drug testing is authorized by the Swimming Federation, but the drug testing itself has been more and more taken over by private contractors. And this particular drug testing company, IDTM, International Drug Testing, it just merged in 2018 with a U.S. Drug testing. Drug Free Sports is the name of the U.S. company. And so, it's one element here, the privatization of drug testing, which I think, in some ways it should make one more suspicious than less, because the potential for corruption and manipulation is clear. In any case, what happened was that 3 people showed up. The drug testing team consists of a leader, a so-called drug control officer, a blood collection officer who's authorized to take a blood sample, and then a third assistant who observes him making a urine sample, and observes that there's no corruption of that process or putting some other urine in the vial or anything like that. So the drug, that's the drug team. All of them have to be authorized. In this case, Sun Yang noticed right off the bat that the guy who was supposed to be the observer, the assistant, was he was taking photographs of Sun Yang in his house. This is, at 10 o'clock at night after he had just traveled all day from being in the competition in Indonesia. And so Sun Yang said, you're not supposed to be taking photographs of me in my house. You didn't come here to take photographs. You're supposed to. And by the way, where's your authorization? And that was the beginning of that things spiraled out of control, because he had no paperwork. And then it turned out the blood collection officer did not have appropriate paperwork. And then the kicker was that the head of the test team was a person who a year before Sun Yang had some kind of an incident when she was part of a blood collection team, and he had actually filed a complaint against her. He had written a complaint against this person. So this person was now the head of the drug testing team. And so one thing led to another, and over hours, Sun Yang called talked to the captain of the swim team. He called his doctor. He said, "What, can you come over and be part of this and see what's going on?" And it went on for hours and hours. And the upshot was Sun Yang said, this is not a valid blood collection. And because you don't have authorized people here, I can't allow anybody to take my blood and urine sample, because, as an aside, the athletes justifiably have to be very careful, because somebody could spike the sample or do anything. So they said, no, you cannot take the blood sample that had already been taken at that time. And then there's a lot of details here. I'm kind of wondering how much detail to go into. I think I'll just keep it simple, that Sun Yang and Sun Yang's doctor said, no, you cannot take the blood because this is an authorized test. It's an aborted test, and we don't allow it. They said that the test team said that they cannot leave without the test equipment. So the only way to remove the blood sample, which was in a separate container within a glass jar, was to break the glass jar and remove the glass sample. And so that's what they did. And then, of course, afterwards, it was reported that they broke the glass and people thought the blood filled on the floor and everything else. But in actuality, they simply did what they had to do to remove the blood sample, and the blood sample is still stored in refrigeration and could be tested. But in any case, so what happened there after that was that the test team said that there had been a violation of the practices, and Sun Yang had refused to go along with the test. Sun Yang said, well, that's not true. It was an aborted test. You had an unqualified test team. And we offered to do the testing, just send people who are qualified and who have the certification papers. We can't give our samples to just anybody who shows up. So the World International Swimming Federation had a hearing, and they determined that Sun Yang, maybe shouldn't have done what he did, but that he was justified, that the collection team did not have the authorization papers. The World Anti-Doping Agency was reportedly furious at this decision, and they took the case against Sun Yang to the Court of Arbitration in Sports. So WADA was filing charges against both Sun Yang and saying the the International Swimming Federation decision was wrong. The Court of Arbitration for Sports subsequently in February of 2020 said that that they agreed with WADA and that Sun Yang should be banned for 8 years because this is a second anti-doping rule violation. In June of last year, Sun Yang lawyers appealed to the Fifth Swiss Federal Tribunal, which is the Swiss Supreme Court. And then just a month and a half ago, the Swiss Federal Tribunal ruled in favor of Sun Yang, shocking the swimming world because they very, very rarely overturn decisions by CAS, Court of Arbitration in Sports. But they did overturn it. They overturned it primarily on the basis of racist tweets that the panel president had made, which I discovered with support from a source in China. And so the case will be reheard in the coming months. Right now, Sun Yang, I was in contact with his coach the other day. Sun Yang is fired up and training for the Olympics, which hopefully will be held this summer. And then it's expected that there will be a rehearing of the case in the coming months. So it's still possible that Sun Yang could be banned from this upcoming Olympics, but I believe he's got a very strong case and that he will win a retrial. This kind of wraps up. This was my introduction to my second article about Sun Yang, and where I say over the past 5 years, the sports anti-doping movement has been distorted into a political tool to attack Russia and now China. This article reveals the bias behind the decision to ban Chinese athlete Sun Yang for 8 years. For example, the president of the panel tweeted against a yellow-faced Chinese monster and secretly mocked the athlete's mother in the hearing. I hope the facts presented here help get a new fair hearing for Sun Yang. A few examples of the tweets by Franco Frattini. This yellow-faced Chinese monster smiling while torturing a small dog. Shame on China. This is China today. I'm sure nobody will have the courage to respond to me, Ambassador of China. Are you silent on the torture of dogs in Yulin? Now, it's not just, I mean, the media, and especially the swimming media, has kind of belittled the overturning on the basis of, well, you know, it's some tweets. But it's the racism underlying the tweets. And much more than that, this was basically a NATO panel. The Court of Arbitration in Sports, all the members were either directly a part of NATO or were allies of it. Franco Frattini had been the foreign minister of Italy, very supportive of the Italian participation in the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. This right here talks about in April 2011, and Italy has recognized the governing body of rebel forces opposed to the regime of Gaddafi as Libya's sole legitimate interlocutor, Italian Foreign Minister Frattini said Monday. So from Iraq to Libya and on, Frattini is very much pro-NATO and very hostile to China. Another member of the three-person panel was this guy, Romano Subbiotto, who was tweeting a nice little exchange with Ambassador John Bolton with Subbiotto's suggestion that that they parachute aid into Venezuela. Remember Berlin. This would multiply the points where aid is received. This was going to be aid to Juan Guaido when there was the pretense that Juan Guaido was the legitimate president of Venezuela, and the U.S. and allies wanted to send relief supplies as part of a propaganda stunt. So here we have Romano Subioto. A couple of last items here. Swiss court confirms the racist tweet was the cause of Sun Yang ban overturning. And this is the New York Times story on it. So the case goes on. Right where we stand right now is the Russians are not allowed to participate as Russians in the upcoming Olympics, and it remains to be seen whether Sun Yang will be there. Hopefully, he will win the rehearing, but we don't know. In any case, I think it is an important part of the overall struggle and the exposure. One last point is that U.S. supremacy, just as an example of U.S. supremacy and the belief that the U.S. can pass whatever laws it wants and that they need to be heard and respected by the whole world. There is in the last 2 months, there was signed the Rodchenkov Act. Grigory Rodchenkov, as you will remember, was the mastermind of doping in Russia, who became an angel as soon as he was on the U.S. side making accusations against Russia. Anyway, Congress, in all their wisdom, has passed an act which will give the United States extraterritorial federal jurisdiction over anti-doping offenses, and the goal is to impose criminal sanctions on persons involved in international doping fraud conspiracies, to provide restitution for victims of such conspiracies, and to require sharing of information with the U.S. anti-doping agency. So you're basically going to have information between the U.S. anti-doping agency and the Homeland Security and all the other intelligence agencies. And I think the purpose of this for the United States athletes is they can file charges if there's another athlete can be successfully accused of doping, and they can claim harm because of marketing potential or whatever, that will allow them to take them to court. And even the World Anti-Doping Agency says this is a really bad idea, and that no nation ever before has asserted criminal jurisdiction over doping offenses that occurred outside its national borders. And there's good reason no nation has done that. But in any case, the exceptional nation that the world cannot do without, supposedly, has passed an act which claims this right. So I think I'll leave it there right now. It's 11:35. I need to go at noon, so we got 25 minutes. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rick. Let's take a quick short to announce the next sessions and quick fundraising appeal. So Richard, do you want to go ahead and make your announcement? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Are you referring to me about
Yes,
the
fundraising?
Yeah. Okay. Just want to remind everybody that we're still collecting funds for the Marxist Library, and I'm placing in the chat some details on how to the mechanism for which you can send some money. We need money both for our activities and to support our physical home at the Marxist Library. One thing I didn't include in there is a suggestion that people give on a regular basis, even small amounts, and you can set it up as one of our supporters did as a recurring a recurring payment from your bill pay and your bank will send a check every month to us. We're now able also to accept funds through Zelle, and please contact me if you want to do that, and I'll give you the details. I don't want to put it online, but at any rate, please consider it. It's important for our work and the work of the movement to send the money. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So take a look in the chat if you're interested in making a donation. Jean, if you could unmute yourself and just make a quick announcement about the upcoming programs, and we'll go to the Q&A. People who have questions, please raise your hand and we'll call you in order. In the meantime, Jean, go ahead and make your announcement. You're still muted.
Okay, fine. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Rick. That was really informative, the way imperialism permeates our lives so much. So we're going to continue our discussion of imperialism next week with the resistance. We have Phyllis Bennis, who's a fellow, most of you know her. She's a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., and has done numerous books looking at different aspects. And she's going to be talking about the recent past and future of peace and solidarity movements from 2008 and 2021 and beyond. And this is really vital information. I think we need to figure out what we're going to do about this whole beast that we live in. Following that, we have Raj will speak on a topic related to ecology, and we have John Holm. No, we have some tech workers talking about unionization in the tech industry. So we have some good programs coming up. Stick with us, and back to you, Alan.
Thank you. So go ahead if you have any questions, raise your hand. We'll start off with Richard Fallenbaum has your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Richard.
Unmute.
There you go. You're unmuted.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, I also appreciate very much your discussion, Mr. Sterling, about the imperialist tactics. I just want to put it in a little broader context. You know, the discussion you had about McLaren and his refusal to consider any other, one-sided. He was prosecutor, judge, and executioner at the same time. We see this in other spheres too. I'm reminded of the doping of the Litvinenko and Goebbels in Britain, where there was claimed that they were attacked by instantly fatal drugs, but they never, at least of the Goebbels, they never died, and they in fact disappeared off the face of the earth. And we were expected to take the word of the British authorities. And the same thing with the shoot down of the plane in the airliner in Ukraine. The investigation commission excluded Russia and only included the Ukrainian government, and it was a very biased. And then I'm thinking of the chemical attacks, so-called, in Syria, which was also exposed to be completely bogus. And so this is a general strategy of imperialism to exploit all these you know, and I think it's very good that you bring it out. Thank you.
Rick, do you want to make a quick comment response?
No, I think I agree totally.
Okay.
Yeah, good comparisons.
All right. Next up is Jean. If you would unmute, or you are unmuted, go ahead and make your comment.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Rick. This was very good, and it's kind of amazing the way this imperialism, stretches its tentacles down into the very details of our daily life. But what struck me also was the anti-Chinese racism that was so evident in this. I don't know if Russians are subjected to the same kind of racism as Asians are, but our Vets for Peace group has a China study group, and we have lots of Chinese, and there's also an organization in San Francisco and centered in Chinatown, the Bay Area China group. And, you see it in the news, people just attack Chinese people for no reason. One old grandmother was set on fire in New York a few weeks ago. And so it's really amazing. It's not amazing, but it's kind of symptomatic the way it attacks people that we know and or interact with. So that's my comment. And I don't know if you have more to say on that. Are Russians subjected to the same kind of racism that Chinese are, going way back to the Chinese Exclusion Act? So that's all I have, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think again, I totally agree. I think there is a real Russophobia, and I've started, I've been seeing it in various places. There's a Netflix series that's from Norway. It's called Occupation. And it's a good example of Russophobia on this, with this totally phony story that Russians occupied Norway, and the Norwegian freedom fighters are fighting back. But the Russophobia and the real hatred and the poisoning of attitudes against Russia is just dripping in this Netflix TV series, which originally was produced in Norway. I'm curious, I'd like to, if I have time, I want to research the funding of this series, because it's really, it's very political. Of course, they even explicitly talk about how unfortunate it is that that Norway's stepped back from alliance with the United States. And it's really poisoning the attitudes. And so it just goes to show race is not the only factor. Of course, Russians are of many different ethnicities. If when you go there, you realize how many Asian-looking Russians there are. But that's I think the undoing really. I'm kind of grateful for Frattini for being so stupid to put such blatantly racist tweets out there. If it wasn't for that, I think probably it would not have been overturned. But it wasn't his participation in NATO or his anti-China hostility. It was simply his use of the, calling people yellow-faced is probably what did it. And I think that probably made it impossible for them to deny the racism. But that was just it. That was just the frosting on the cake, or that was the tip of the iceberg, because the bias and the racism against China is much deeper than that, and it applies to Russia as well.
Thank you.
Next up is Sharon, followed by Richard W., Mehmet, and then Raj. So Sharon, if you would unmute.
Thank you. Well, I have one basic question is, what can we do about this? I have some thoughts on that, but they're not very coherent. This is the first time I've really, been asked to seriously consider this, and I'm so glad that that Rick, we were able to have Rick make this presentation. The racism is stark, and the nationalism, of course, also the nationalist national supremacy is also very stark, for reasons that you've all mentioned. I mean, we're back to ordinary imperialism, traditional imperialism, or one could say the real imperialism. I was struck by Biden's speech. I watched Biden's speech to the Munich Security Conference, and he said the words "America is back" about 5 or 10 times, and he bashed China and Russia in the course of saying all that. I think that we really need, the left in this country needs to seriously consider all of that and prioritize how we're going to fight back against this Cold War against China in particular, and the racism in particular. I feel so bad about Sung Yang. My son was in swimming until he gave it all up for football. And I know something about the international swimming competitions. And it's just heartbreaking that the sports can be so influenced by the imperialists. I'm wondering, maybe one demand should be to change the nature of this court. Why is it only NATO forces that are in there? China should demand that they have a representative on that court, and Russia and other countries. It seems to me it should be rotating or something. Maybe we could figure out some demand like that that could be fought for. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I think you're raising an excellent point, which is the selection of judges for the Court of Arbitration in Sports, and that the selection was very crucial both in Sun Yang's case and in the case against Russia. This decision where they made just a couple of months ago, where they agreed with WADA and they have banned Russia for 2 years. The judges were all from the West. In the latter case, they were from Australia. The president of the panel was from Australia, and there was somebody from France and somebody, I think, from the UK, but actually it was from Italy. So they're all from NATO or NATO allies, like Australia. They do not have to be. There's a look, and I made the point in the article how bizarre it was that you had a hearing with of a Chinese citizen, and there are 11 Chinese Mandarin speakers in the total, the total list of judges who are qualified to be in the Court of Arbitration in Sports. But the three they selected were one from the UK, one from Belgium, one from Italy. So they didn't have anybody who could speak Chinese, and it was a huge part of the problem, because the translation was very poor. Now, very wisely, as it turned out, Sun Yang asked for the hearing to be public. It was an all-day, it was about an 8 or 10 hour hearing, and you can still watch the hearing, but it was through looking at the whole video that I determined some important factors which wouldn't have been seen otherwise. But they should have had at least one Chinese Mandarin speaker on the panel. And actually, it's a nice example, because there are numerous Australian swimmers who have been really ugly in the racism around this. Matt Horton, for example, And he is being heroized for refusing to shake hands with Sun Yang, for refusing to share the podium with him when Sun Yang won the gold and he won the silver. He's getting heroized in various quarters. I think pushing back against that is useful. If we talk about what's useful, I think one voice of criticism can sometimes make a big difference. There's a huge difference between zero criticism and even one criticism, if it's, sensible. And but my point is that, so the nice thing is that contrary to those negative examples from Australia, there's a leading woman sportscaster, Tracy Holmes, who's been brilliant in defense of Sun Yang, and Sun Yang's coach is Australian, Dennis Cotterill, and he said the charges are not true. He would never coach somebody who was doping. So there are some nice exceptions to the prevailing media bias and the bias that's been shown by some of the athletes.
Okay, next up is Richard W., followed by Mehmet, Raj, and then Yusuf. So Richard, if you would unmute yourself.
Now I can. Thank you. Unfortunately, Sharon has sort of preempted a couple of points that I wanted to bring up or make or whatever. One point I wanted to we sort of need to go in a little bit further is that they don't really test for drugs per se, if I'm not mistaken. I think they test for metabolites, don't they? And that these metabolites could be the result of other drugs. So when they say that they're flunking their testing, even that's sort of questionable. The other question I had was, aside from the composition of the WADA, why did it go to the Swiss federal courts? I mean, that seems kind of peculiar. Third question I had is, what about Iran in all this? Are they next up to be excoriated, or I mean, I would think that they would be, the focus of anger as well. And the fourth question I had is, if I understand your point correctly, a lot of the criticism should be directed at the mainstream media for not reporting, for example, that Italy is an offender, that the United States is an offender, that the Russian and the Chinese come after all these people. So to sort of get back to what Sharon was asking, what can we do about this? We really need to be focusing our attention on the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Boston Globe or you name it. So I'll shut up and mute myself again.
Okay, well, thanks, Richard. I'm not sure of the details of the testing. I think it's developed to a point where it's really accurate, and they can detect microscopic amounts of chemicals. And you're right that it's possible that things could be coming from non-sources. There may be prohibited chemicals that are involved in foods that you would not expect. For example, at the Korean Games, there were some people who tested positive for some prohibited drug, and it turned out that drug, the prohibited drug, was a component in the aspirin, which is sold over the counter in Korea. So it's kind of it has to be considered very carefully, and it's easy to hurl accusations of drug violation, but you really need to know the details and know what the circumstances are. But right now they're testing, they're going back and testing from games like, for example, the 2012 London games. They're testing samples that still exist, and now they can detect microscopic amounts that they could not test with previous test equipment. So that's another phenomenon that's going on. But I think the testing is accurate, but the accuracy needs to be, you need to consider the big picture. The Swiss Federal Court, the reason that is the ultimate tribunal is simply because the Court of Arbitration in Sports is based in Lausanne, Switzerland. So there's no other court that is above it. So that's the reason that the Swiss Federal Court, which is equivalent to the Swiss Supreme Court, is the ultimate arbiter. Iran, I'm sure they would love to smear Iran if Iranian athletes could be found to doping. Of course, Iran's, I think they've got some prominence in the weightlifting field, and the weightlifting is an area that traditionally there's been more doping associated with it. So, that could be, but it's like I believe with material incentives and with the intensity of the competition, there's a small percentage of doping that goes on in nearly all or nearly all countries, and it wouldn't be surprising if that happened in Iran as elsewhere. But the point is that they are singling out Russia, and they have gone after Sun Yang for the reasons I talked about earlier. The mainstream media, I think you're exactly right. The bias in the mainstream media is a huge factor here. For example, when I referred to Mac Horton and his show, and he was widely heroized. He was widely, and the media pretty much was giving him high fives and kudos to Mac Horton for being so brave. The International Olympic Committee was correctly trying to say, we don't want to, you should not be having a protest at the awards ceremony. And by the way, you don't have any evidence that he's a drug cheat, so you should be quiet. But most of the mainstream media has promoted that kind of bias and discrimination.
Okay, next up, you have to leave in a couple minutes, right, Rick?
A few minutes. I've got time for another. How about two more questions?
Okay, good. We'll go ahead with Mehmet, Raj, and then Youssef. We'll do those three, and then we'll cut it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Mehmet, if you would unmute yourself, please.
Yes, I am. And Rick, first of all, thank you very much for a tremendous presentation and information that you presented. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to follow up with that, imperialism, racism, and corruption have all gone together, and we are looking at Olympics as just one demonstration of this. Wherever the Olympics go, most of the time, corruption goes with it. And this may or may not fall into what you presented today, but I'd like to get your opinion on this, is that you did mention in 2021, as I understand, because they were delayed, the Olympics is coming up in Japan, and Japan is really pushing to have these Olympics when there is a pandemic going on. And not only that, but they are planning baseball matches right on top of Fukushima, when it's still white hot with radioactivity. And they're trying to use this as, first of all, a propaganda to tell the world that, Fukushima is not a problem and it's all clean now. Look, we are even, playing on top of it. The second one is, of course, the money that they are trying to make out of this. I think this scandal outweighs any of the other, scandals that they are trying to propagate. I don't know if you'd like to say a couple of things about this. Thank you very much again for the presentation.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mehmet. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There was an article recently, a day or two ago, about making this similar point. I believe they're going to start the running of the Olympic torch is going to start in Fukushima, in fact. That's something to be concerned about. I think should they personally, I hope they have the Olympics. I hope it goes ahead. It may be that it probably will be the case that fans need to be severely limited, but Australia is holding the Australian Open tennis tournament right now, and it's going ahead. So I think I hope they can do it safely with limits, but we'll see.
Okay, next up is Raj, followed by Yusuf. Raj,
Yeah,
unmute
Rick, thank you
yourself.
very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. I wanted to ask you, this is an observation of mine. In the old British Empire, the game that was of choice was cricket. And somehow Pakistan and India, England and Australia and New Zealand, these are still playing that game. And it's very popular in all these countries, okay? But somehow the issue of racism has been kind of overcome there. You don't see that they accept, because usually the team that beats up the European teams, and New Zealand is considered, and Australia considered part of their identity is still white, but it doesn't come up there. So I think this is kind of related to, imperialism uses racism as a way to kind of gain solidarity. This is nationalism of imperialism, basically, because white countries, they were predominantly white, became colonial powers. Industrial capitalism developed there. But it's very interesting for me to see that in cricket, and I also think in soccer it doesn't exist, but in Olympics it comes up. And in case of Russia, this whole thing began after Russia retook Crimea, which belonged to it in the first place. Mm-hmm. And because the Crimean people, by a very large majority, wanted to return after semi-fascist government took over in Ukraine. Any comments on any of those? Thank you.
Well, I know, the Australian commentator Tracy Holmes says said the Pakistan cricket team was the best ever when they came back and they beat Australia recently. Yeah. High praise. So, I'm not sure. The best of sports unites people, unites races, ethnicities, countries. And on the other hand, it can be a fomenter of discrimination and bias. It can go either way. The Olympic Charter, I think, is a very noble, it got very noble goals that should not be cast aside. And that's one thing that I've seen in this whole case of the Russian athletes and the Chinese athletes, at least exemplified by Sun Yang, is it's really contrary to the Olympic Charter. They are blatantly discriminating against Russian athletes. Just by nature of your nationality, you're being discriminated against. So the best of sports unites and unifies and helps international relations, and on the other hand, the worst is dangerous and opposite to that.
Okay, our last questioner is Yusuf. If you would unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Yes, I don't follow sport. I'm not known for following sports very well, but I remember that during the Cold War there were widespread allegations, continuous allegations against the GDR and other socialist countries, but I think particularly GDR, East Germany, that they were using I don't think they offered any proof at the time. The athletes themselves were not accused, but the press was continuously accusing them of using drugs. So, do you have any comments about that?
I think, I actually haven't looked into that, to what the validity is. I think, I think it's likely that there was drug use. It's much more pervasive than realized. Just some years ago, they took a confidential poll of international athletes, and 40% admitted that they used performance enhancing drugs at one time or another. So that was a secret poll where a person's identity was secret, and that was guaranteed as such. So it persists as a problem. I think it was probably more commonly done. The World Anti-Doping Agency just began in 1999. It's not as though it's been around for many decades. So it's a kind of a new development. There are some people who say that it's really gone overboard. For some time, they were considering whether to ban coffee. Some people say it's really gone overboard in the sense that they're prohibiting drugs that are not performance enhancing drugs, and they're honest medications. Maybe the tide has swung too much in that direction. That's kind of I haven't looked into the cases of that, but one point that's a little bit related is that the New York Times, when they were doing these stories featuring Grigory Rodchenkov, they located a person who had been a coach in the Soviet Union in Chicago. Now, he was an older man. He was like in his 80s, but in his youth, he had been a coach in the Soviet Union, and he had gone to live with his daughter and her family in Chicago. They interviewed him, and they really highlighted the fact that he said that they used some performance enhancing drugs, and they really minimized what he was also saying is the main thing that Soviet athletes were successful is because they had a very strong training program. And so it was athletes training, and the use of some medications or drugs was really a minor part of that. So the New York Times, as it's, they emphasized one thing, they de-emphasized the other, and the story became kind of like Soviet coach admits they were pervasively using drugs in the old days. So there was a bias in that sense. And I'm pretty sure that the Soviet coach regretted allowing himself to be interviewed by the New York Times on that story, because they distorted what he was saying.
Great. Thank you, Rick, for speaking today. What we're going to do now is just end the formal part of the meeting and open up for discussion, unmoderated discussion. But
Yeah.
Want to thank you. And anytime that you have anything that you'd like to present, we'd love to invite you to come back.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Alan. It was my pleasure to be with you today. I've got some other commitments going on now, so I'll have to leave for now, but I'll see you again in future, I hope.
Great.
Thank
topic.
you, Rick.
Okay,
Thank you, Rick. It was excellent.
Okay, bye-bye, guys.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com. And the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.